Good morning, everybody.
Hello.
This is August 24th, 2020, and we're up to episode 80.
80. Whew.
How old is Betty White? Because pretty soon we're going to have a Betty White at
Oh, she's like 94 or something.
yeah, so whenever we get to 94, or whatever Betty White's age is, that'll be kind of like, that's the next
Yeah.
magic number.
Yeah. Well, I'm feeling those triple digits coming. So I'm excited about that.
Ambitious. When we get to
Yeah.
100, if we don't get a $100,000 donation that day.
Yeah.
Which, speaking of which, Mike, this is a kind of a co-production of the Center for Prophetic Imagination and Micah, but it's kind of mostly Micah's thing, and so donations should go there. You should support.
Yeah.
I mean, this is like Micah. This isn't just the only thing that Micah's about. But if you like this, send a little cash to Micah, the Institute of Contemplation and Healing. You can look at the Facebook page and find information there. Of course, this is still free to watch, so no pressure.
No pressure.
But Jesus is watching.
Yes.
You don't want to disappoint.
There he is. Okay. So this is the dawning of the age of Aquarius. This is actually pretty wild, this episode, because we have never gotten so much pre-episode chatter.
Yeah.
So, we put these up, Mark puts these up on his page and shares them around. It says what the next episode is going to be. And man, the crowd went wild. So we had all kinds of stuff. So I'm super excited about this.
It's also one of the few episodes that's by request. So it's not like we had this planned. It just kind of came up and Dan and I have thoughts about that. I guess we can have a conversation. This is important. Leah says that she's 98.
98. Betty White is 98. Oh my God. Oh, that's incredible. Yeah. So
we're gonna.
Okay. So CK already has a comment here.
I have a therapist who talks about universal mind, universal thought, universal consciousness. I think when you use this abstract, formless narrative instead of, say, a godhead or a deity that has a tactile relationship with history, that idea delves into New Agey. So
that's a great comment to start off with. So I thought I would just say a little bit about the history of this, because as is clear, this term has come to be used in many different ways to mean a lot of different things, including, as was pointed out on our page, anytime you just don't like somebody's religious practice, you call it New Agey.
Anyone who's just kookier than you gets discounted to the New Age. That's generally the operative definition for most people.
Yes. Yeah. So for those of you that aren't 60s flower children, this term basically arose in the late 60s, 1970s, as a very specific term about a new age, a new period of time. And
the age of Aquarius.
So the age of Aquarius was the biggest sort of formal term, but there was also just a sense of a new age of human consciousness, right? And many religious systems, including Christianity, those of you that are familiar with Phyllis Tickle, she died fairly recently, but she had this also the system of 500-year ages, and that we were also entering a new age, the age of the spirit. And so there are many systems that have this idea that human beings evolve through different ages. And so this was this notion that we are now evolving in our consciousness, which, if you look at social media, that's hard to believe, really. But this was the idea, so that we're evolving into this new age of consciousness. And the idea was that people needed to get involved in all sorts of spiritual type activities to help themselves enter into this. And I think that to me, the really important dividing line that, quote, makes something more New Age than more traditionally religious in the sense that most people in this country know about Christianity, Judaism, now increasingly Islam, is that really this movement is just part of a very, very, very long theological argument around that focuses around the issue of power to make change. So if you think about where is the locus of spiritual power, right? And, and we've mentioned Gnosticism before. If you look at the argument between Augustine and Pelagius, all of these have a very similar kind of tone, right? On the one hand, there's this idea that God has the ultimate power to make transformative change in the world. On the other side is the idea that human beings really have this power. And the practices and all the activities and whatever you want to get into, crystals, past lives, whatever, meditation, doesn't really matter. That's not the issue. The issue is much more about this question of, do we as human beings do these practices to connect with something bigger than ourselves that has the power in the universe? Or do we as human beings engage in these activities because we can become the prime mover in our lives and in the world? And that to me is really what delineates. It's not the particular activity or the terms or the theological statements. It's this dividing line of power.
I mean, you used to hear people use terms like human potential, these movements were often couched in human potential, and some of this goes back to before the New Age, different kind of new religion and Swedenborgianism and all that sort of stuff. But I don't hear people usually, to me, the way I hear it these days, instead of talking about human potential, people are really wrapped up into these ideas of Ken Wilber, levels of development, integral consciousness, which to me is very similar, although it's a little bit more nuanced, maybe, I don't know. But that's usually the kind of, in the spaces I encounter people who are, I use this example in the conversation thread I started earlier yesterday, that I was literally away for 2 weeks in the desert Southwest on a wilderness rite of passage where we were going to enter into the underworld to retrieve our gifts for our people. And we were doing drum chants in an ancient kiva and talking to trees. None of that is exaggerated. We did all those things. And in that group,
you sure you weren't just doing a role-playing game?
Yeah, if it was
LARPing, RPG.
Now, I had discomfort with that. I almost had entirely to do with how much of it was appropriating indigenous spiritualities without really doing the work. That's where I get a little awkward. It's a little kooky to a lot of people. So I'm, rural Minnesotan, so I was feeling that. But the funny thing is, almost all those people use the term New Age to talk about people that were kookier than them. It didn't apply to them.
Right.
So I'm like, Carl, I just saw you talking to a juniper. How? So, but the issue for them had to do with New Age is whatever. If you're a bliss head, someone who is so focused on positivity that you don't deal with the heavy stuff. Now, that seems again to be a different line, but similar to this idea of are you trusting in just positivity and human potential to win the day, or is there some darker stuff in there that you should be suspicious about, is kind of the question. And so for that, a lot of these groups where I encounter it tend to be really rooted in Jungian psychology. That's kind of the scientific legitimizer for a lot of spiritual practitioners. And to them, it's still I can see how it dances that line, because to me, it seems I would probably call that New Age, but to them, it's no, we're diving into the collective unconsciousness, but including the dark stuff, and that's bigger than an individual. So using your kind of framework, it would be like, well, that's not, it's kind of New Age adjacent, but it's not exactly that.
Yeah.
They're landing on the side of something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah. See, and I think it's really interesting how New Age has evolved into this sort of pejorative term, because I actually feel that that is kind of picking up from the negativity of the traditional religious culture, right? And so, Christianity has been blasting this kind of nonstop as satanic, evil, syncretistic, all these kinds of things. And I feel like that negativity, people, it's sort of like cosmic gaslighting. People have been picking that up, and they're like, well, we don't want to be New Age. So we may be talking to trees, but we don't want to be New Age. And so that to me is another layer of all of this it's almost like this internalized religious abuse. Excuse me. That has muddied the waters a great deal. We've got a lot of comments coming on.
Yeah, so Ellen raised a question. Have you heard Jim Carrey talking about anything recently? He does strike me as like someone who I would have just lumped in with New Agey thinking, but I'm digging his massive prophet beard that he's grown out.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I have not heard him talking about anything recently. But I guess that'd be cool.
CK is love native spiritual LARPing. It should be a thing. Joseph writes, I think what makes New Age a pejorative term is that it is frequently dismisses any form of authority other than itself. It seems to lead to narcissism. No one is the boss of me.
Yeah. Well, right. So that is that kind of becomes the dark side of New Ageism, and we've talked about the commercial aspects, right? So if I'm in charge of my own enlightenment and I've got to figure it out, well, then I've got to buy stuff, right, to get the right equipment, the right spiritual equipment, the right books, the right trinkets. This is where the appropriation comes in, which, I think is just horrible, particularly when it comes to native cultures. Now you've got the whole appropriation of substances, right? So now, you've got ayahuasca retreats going crazy. You've got, microdosing. You've got, all these kinds of things. And it can really feed into narcissism. Now, religious systems can create all kinds of abuse and problems as well. But yes, that is definitely one of the potential major pitfalls of New Ageism.
There's this new Netflix series called Unwell, and I thought it was fascinating. They did one on essential oils, which is now this booming industry. And see, obviously we know, like, when I have a toothache, I can put clove oil on it and it actually does stuff. So it's not like it's all BS. But people are like putting essential oils in their food and everything in ways that are probably unsafe. And the groups driving this tend to either fit into the category of like people that are prone towards what we might think of as more New Age, at least very more hippie kind of mentality people, and then also fundamentalist evangelicals. So this is where it gets weird. Like if you go to these, like one of the couples that makes millions of dollars a year selling this stuff, it's their essential oil use is tied deeply with their fundamentalist Christianity. And this is where you get into this weird overlap. And to me, the thing that has to do with this commercial piece, like, and I'm sure those two groups of people hate each other, but there's still this sort of this weird success drivenness that if I can figure this out, I can be super successful and awesome and have all my dreams come true. And I feel like that's part of the getting into some of the suspicion that I have. Like I don't think we should just have so much confidence in individual human potential in a late stage consumer capitalist society like ours.
Well, yeah, but again, to me, commercialism is not necessarily the dividing line, right? I
No.
mean, you can go to, any modern groovy Christian rockin' conference, and they've got a ginormous stadium full of stuff to buy, right? I mean, we've talked about that in regards to mission trips. And so, yeah, I mean, this is America, right? So commercialism is going to take over every spiritual or religious activity. And yes, I mean, New Ageism is rife for Susan's comment here.
I guess on the spectrum of judginess, I'm less intolerant of New Agers than evangelical Christians. Fair point. New Agers sometimes annoy me, but seem less of a threat. Yeah, I think to me, it's like when I think of the New Age abuse, I think of individual cults, or I just think of wealthy white people going to Esalen and like spending $10,000 for a retreat. And I'm like, that's gross, but it's not gross like Jerry Falwell Jr. Having the like being buddies with the president and oppressing the hell out of gay people. So like one is irritating because it doesn't live up to like its hype, and the other is just evil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Keep on rolling.
You're looking for the term woo. Yes. Anything more woo than you is usually.
There you go. That's a great little rhyme. More woo than you. That would be a good t-shirt. I would like to embrace being more woo than somebody, actually. Okay.
I heard many of the QAnon people are New Age. That's another one. Like anything you get into sort of esoteric stuff, you're starting to get into the area that people would normally call it New Age because it just is confusing and esoteric sounding. But QAnon, like if you're going to talk about spiritually weird.
Yeah, we're going to have to do one on that. But yes, I mean, a big part of the New Age thing, and again, this fits to me with this whole business of power and coming to understand religious power, is Gnosticism, right? That there is secret knowledge out there, and if I get that secret knowledge, I will be, bigger, better, faster, stronger, right? And so, a big part of the New Age phenomenon was how suddenly you had all these housewives speaking to these ancient beings and then writing books about it. And, the Course in Miracles was the most famous one, but there were lots of them. There were lots of them coming out. And it was this whole thing. Like now I've talked to, Fred, who's a 22,000-year-old ancient being living on an asteroid who told me all the secrets. And I wrote this book, and now you can have them too. And so conspiracy theories obviously are all about secret knowledge that you suddenly get and you're in the know. And QAnon is definitely full of that.
Gregory writes, a good litmus test for any spirituality or spiritual tradition, does it foster selfishness or solidarity? That's kind of my big thing. That's what because I have tons of people who like in South Minneapolis, which is a very progressive enclave, comparatively speaking anyways. I have lots of friends who are into stuff that I'm not into that, but they're all like in solidarity. So like if someone's really gets deep into stuff that I might not enjoy spiritually, like they're into kind of earth spiritualities that kind of sometimes I wonder how much of it's made up. Like whatever, I don't care, because they're doing the work. It's actually fueling them into being more deeply connected with their neighbors, with the land in a way that actually moves things in the right direction. That is just infinitely better than even the most than someone who like has pictures of St. Francis on their walls, but they're a dick. Like what?
Well, right. And, and if you look at, for example, the average mainline church community, there's an awful lot of selfishness over solidarity going on there, right? They're mostly inwardly turned. They're not looking out, doing the work, engaging society for the least of these. So yeah, I think that this to me has always been my problem with the traditional religion critique of New Age ism, is that I think a huge amount of it is projection, and that it's very easy to rip on somebody else for X, Y, or Z, but you're kind of doing the same thing. So this notion that just because you say God over and over and over again, you're not going to be a self-centered narcissist is not necessarily true.
Ford writes, how will we look at New Age mysticism in 100 years? Is it a broader trend in Western religious discourse away from Christocentrism? Maybe. I mean, I don't care.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I love Jesus, but like Christocentrism, like there's tons of people who have their theology formally centered on Christ who are deeply not Christocentric. So to me, if someone is mystically connecting with God and they're not naming it as Jesus, that doesn't bother me nearly as much. To me, this is like inevitable. Like the reason why I think New Age is kind of similar to previous stuff is like this is the result of a pluralistic world. Mm-hmm. You have religions bumping into each other, you're going to get innovation, and it's like it's always been the case.
Yeah, well, we've always had, and that's why I say, to me, this New Age phenomenon is not in any way unique. It just happens to be a 20th century expression of this conversation that's been going on forever. And again, you know, the Gnostics in the early church thought that they were Christocentric. They just had a very different understanding of what that meant. So I think this is going to be an ongoing dialogue and discussion, you know, that, and I think that the traditional spiritualities of all kinds walk this line. You know, it's kind of like the faith versus works conversation. Like, we do have something to do with our enlightenment. We do have work to do. And it also seems like maybe that's not all there is, right? So,
but no one is the boss of me also means owning your own shit and working on it. I mean, theoretically.
Right. It certainly can be. No, exactly. And then, you know, and that's the positive side of a lot of this. And actually a lot of New Age folks talk about, you know, the darkness and, you know, dealing with deep stuff. And in fact, many of those people came out of Christian communities that they felt were totally superficial, were not really working on anything, where they saw huge amounts of hypocrisy, people not dealing with their stuff, all kinds of abuse going on, terrible things happening. And they were interested in doing meditation practices and doing depth psychology and doing things that would connect them more deeply with all of reality. And they felt like they weren't finding that in organized religion. And that was a big part of the impulse.
No, I think there's, and this is the other piece of it to me, like, I think there are always critiques to be made for all kinds of spiritual stuff. Like, obviously, nothing, especially as things get commodified and appropriate from other cultures, blah, blah, blah. But most of the critiques that come from established religious traditions is usually because they're threatened.
Right, you gotta be suspicious.
Yeah, like, so the idea that somehow, you know, like if I'm dumping on astrology because I really wish people would stay under the, you know, stay Christian because then it's controllable. Like, so when you have bishops, for example, critiquing centering prayer as New Age, which is totally a thing within the Catholic Church. If you look up New Age Catholic, they'll be dumping on centering prayer, which to me is like, okay, how is that New Age? Well, but it is because it falls into this thing of, look, God is mediated through this institution.
Right.
So if you're going outside of that to connect with God, then it's like you're just trusting in yourself. You're like Pelagius of old, and it's just you're going to be led astray, and it's all kooky and strange. I'm like, okay, well, screw you, because you've lost the right to critique Bishop.
All right.
How does organized religion not lead to narcissism? Well, it leads to narcissism for for the leaders, and then if you're not a leader, you get pummeled into submission. It's kind of so they're not.
Yeah, organized religion can lead to lots of narcissism. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm late to the party, so I missed most of it. Do you happen to see a connection between the New Age theological philosophical movement with narcissism? Dan touched on that.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Again, plenty of narcissistic behavior in Christianity,
Yes.
which is disappointing. I mean, it's
very disappointing.
How about everyone selling their New Age belief by saying this is ancient?
Ancient.
That's the other thing I don't get. Like, why do you have to make sure it's somehow like the Enneagram is this latest one? Like, again, tons of people say the Enneagram is New Age. I don't think of it as that particularly New Age, but one of its selling points is trying to claim to be from the tradition of the ancient desert mothers and fathers. And I'm like, that's not true. People like to retrofit things.
Well, yeah. Well, and I think this has to do with this sense of, power. There's some kind of power in things that are old and enduring, and you see this in fiction all the time, right? I mean, why is it that, the ring in Lord of the Rings was this ancient thing that was forged? If something has lasted a long time, we have a sense that it's powerful, that it's, that it has wisdom, that it survived, right? And so, so it must be groovy. So,
Max writes, I wonder how much New Age stuff only survived through the past the 80s by aligning with capitalism. That's how a lot of things stay alive past their starting points, by aligning with capitalism.
Yeah, sure.
Paradox, some spiritual practices are scams or harmful cults.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is sort of the dark side, right? Is that and really in a lot of the negativity and religious, I mean, there have been a lot of people that have noted recently that, there's as much religious abuse in New Age communities as there is in Christianity. Well, that's because a lot of the people who are leaders in these communities have come out of abusive Christian backgrounds and have not done their healing work and then simply recreate this. This was a huge thing in the big Hare Krishna community in West Virginia. And the guy was the son of a really crazy fundamentalist Baptist pastor. And he became this fundamentalist, fake Hindu chanting pastor and started doing all the same abusive stuff. And now one of the real dangerous places that a lot of this is going on is in this whole ayahuasca retreats, because now you've got people incapacitated by chemicals, and it can be really bad. Yeah, absolutely.
Here's another thing that gets wrapped up in New Age stuff a lot is Karen writes, I think the emphasis on manifesting ignores structural problems like institutionalized racism and the power of positive thinking is its own tyranny. It's okay and necessary to have all the emotions. I do think there is a connection point between a lot of what we think of as New Age stuff with the sort of like The Secret or these other books that talk about really like you can manifest reality and that sort of false positivity stuff, which tends to be toxic.
Well, yeah. And again, though, that gets the whole issue of power. Like if I can expand my territory, that was the other big one. Okay. Sirius hasn't heard of it. Yeah, we got to keep rolling through these comments.
Yes. Fundamentalists, especially of the charismatic variety.
Yeah. Oh, good. I'm glad somebody mentioned Gwyneth.
Gwyneth Paltrow and Goop.
Yep, big money maker. You can buy a perfume that smells like her vagina. Mark's just gonna roll right past that one.
I'm gonna roll past that. Joseph Baker. I noticed New Agers had a hard time letting go of the "All Lives Matter" mantra. They needed the ignorance pointed out to them. I don't know how much that's true for everybody, but there is definitely this other piece of it is this universalizing tendency. Like to me, if you're a New Ager, you're more likely to have this perennial religion approach where all religions are fundamentally the same. And so there's this grand unification theory tendency towards spirituality, where, it's always, everybody's life is sacred and everybody's in exactly the same way. All lives matter, kind of neo-Gandhian sort of stuff. Heather writes, secret knowledge is always about power over others, over or for others is a line.
For others.
Yep.
Yeah, which maps really well into what Gregory was talking about.
Yep. Gus writes, it does seem like some of the New Age things Dan is talking about maps really well into individualism and the way that slips into libertarianism as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's one of the reasons why this movement has exploded in such a big way, both in America and in post-war Europe, which is the other place that it's huge. And I don't know if a lot of people realize that. New Ageism is almost bigger, for example, in Germany than it is here in America. And I think a lot of that has to do with not only individualism and libertarianism, but also sort of the kind of, societal despair sort of thing. All right, keep going.
My favorite ethical question for any system is, who's supposed to take out my trash?
That's a great one.
Series writes, as much as New Agers and I have a love-hate relationship, it is easier to challenge them than evangelicals and white Christian liberals.
Yeah, it's a good thing to notice.
Gus writes, we have a poster in our kitchen. Everyone wants a revolution, but no one wants to do the dishes.
Yeah, my thing about that is, how do we deal with our poop? It's kind of a similar idea.
Gregory writes, it's the rough equivalent of the disciples trying to silence an unknown exorcist for casting out demons in Jesus' name because he wasn't with them.
Yeah.
Roger writes, isn't the idea of an inevitable sea change on Earth at the center of things in New Age a perennial philosophy, but isn't some sort of eco-Marxism a more scientific view supported by current evidence? That's a big one. I don't want to get into the pure science of Marxism.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we mentioned at the beginning that all of this got started by, and there is this notion of different ages, and the evolution of the earth towards something good is always a big part of a lot of these things. And as we were saying before we started, both Mark and I are always on the, well, it could go bad also side.
Progress is not inevitable. That's why I'm not a pure Marxist. That's why I'm more of the grumpy anarchist type. Series writes, also, there's a lot of earlier occultism and animism periods that have also existed in U.S. pre-New Age.
Yeah, and I didn't even talk about the history of all of that. We don't have time. But yeah, there's a very long history of that led to the explosion of New Ageism.
Leah writes, do you think that the prosperity gospel is just a New Age aspect of Christianity? Definitely influences are very traceable with this. And
so it's saying, any Christianity where it's like, if you pray right, you'll get something. That's essentially New Ageism, right? I have the power. If I figure out the right prayer, God will then respond.
I much prefer to be in relationship with people who don't claim Jesus as Lord and Savior, but whose behavior and thinking is Christ-like, than with those who claim Jesus as Lord and Savior, whose behavior and thinking isn't Christ-like. I mean, this is one of the big realities, is like content doesn't always match up with practice. Yeah. So like, this is, an important insight. Like, I could say a lot about that. I'm not going to. CK writes, it seems like New Age is not in a not-for-profit way, is kind of reclaiming your power back from organized religion.
Yeah. And that's what a lot of the impulse was, very much early on, for sure.
And to me, that's a good thing. Like,
yeah,
it's just, how is it not a good thing for people to find their own, even if it's just their power and they're just done with the idea of God or some higher power. If you're being abused and you want to claim your own power and do something else, that's a good thing. personally, I believe that there is something more than an individual's power, but like, I'm not going to argue with that over someone who's just leaving an abusive situation. Ceres writes, but it's hard to have healthy communities and systems of those things in a rationalist Protestant culture that is modernist on one hand and fucked established religion. Yep.
Yeah. Well, and I would say that just in general, having healthy communities is hard. And that's ideally what spiritual practice is about, individually and collectively. And it's very hard to do for all kinds of reasons.
When Christianity is brought to other countries, syncretism with existing belief systems is pretty common. It's unavoidable.
Yeah, syncretism is the norm. It's not some weird, bad aberration.
Why not the same in U.S. with Hinduism and Buddhism, et cetera? It's true. You know, it's one of the fascinating things is like how much, you know, especially with the New Age movement, Buddhism was adopted in the United States in a very particular form. But then that stuff gets exported back. So one of these great examples is this form of a bell, a ringing bell, which a lot of people use, is not an ancient Asian thing. This is the result of Western influence back into Asia. Right. Things like that happen all the time. It's just unavoidable.
It's just normal.
Karen saying yikes to something. There's a lot of yikes.
I bet that's the Goop product.
Likeliest. Catherine writes, FYI, my paradox comment above was meant to be much longer, but I can't apparently delete edit while y'all are live. Glad it made sense.
It did.
Joseph Wright, I saw a great meme. Maybe you manifested it. Maybe it's white privilege. Maybe it's Maybelline.
Yeah, maybe it's Maybelline.
Manifesting can become especially problematic when you're dealing with folks who have survived assault.
Yeah. I mean, the whole manifesting thing is theological abuse, period. We're so far over. I don't want to say anything more about that, but
we're going to crank
drop that there.
I'm no fan of what you are deeming New Age, and I dig the discussion about power and I don't know what cui bono is. Still, there is something to be had about wilding of faith and belief. Mainstream Christianity has become timid and lifeless and narcissistic. The work of prophetic imagination is right in the eve of paradox between restoration and renewal. I agree.
Yeah.
So to me, and
that's why we even have the Center for Prophetic Imagination.
And I'm pretty sure probably even a majority of Christians around the world would say that we're New Age.
Yeah. They might.
Catherine writes, just like the political system is so far right that it is easy to appear relatively radical in the U.S., it's pretty easy to be New Age if you grew up in a church that saw centering prayer, incense, horoscopes, or reading fantasy fiction as wildly spiritually transgressive. That's right.
Yeah, you know, the best list that I was ever on, so I was on a list of evil contemplatives who are satanic, New Agey, and to be avoided. And it was... Yeah, and it was Thomas Merton, Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross, Richard Foster, and me. And I'm like, that is the best list I've ever been on.
Some pretty heavy hitters on that.
Like, I win.
Right. I have to wonder if Marx called his treatise a manifesto because he saw where society was headed.
Ooh.
Agree. In the end, it's all just an evolution of something else, or devolution.
Yes, de-evolution.
American evangelicalism is an example of that. It's interesting that on either side of the actual ancient belief systems and made-up New Agey ones, you end up with the unaccountability, manipulation, capitalist, individualistic philosophy. So the question is that whatever we choose, how do we hold ourselves and each other accountable while rooting our beliefs and actions in traditions and breaking from those traditions for real? The educated system change.
Oh, boom. Baby. Publish that one.
There's a boom right there. Good point. Catherine, like apparently I'm New Age because I read horoscopes occasionally, respect indigenous friend ceremonies as spiritually legitimate and powerful, have a dream journal, and don't respond to every experience with a Bible verse, any Jesus-centric prayer.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah. Yep.
You're totally New Age. Reminds me of that time we had that retreat, Dan, and that guy, the two friends left anxiously because we had only mentioned Jesus 4 times during that 3 hours.
Left anxiously is nice. They ran for their lives.
They left a weird passive aggressive handwritten note and it's just disappeared. Adam gets the final word. Adam, I think a lot about sinister activism and how it's very much counterproductive in its own kind of new age activism, which centers yourself taking random talking points and phrases that serve you personally. I mean, this is the thing, like it's the irony with leftist and activist spaces is it's supposed to be about solidarity, but people who have strong narcissistic tendencies, who know how to exploit systems well and come in with a lot of material and relational power, find these places ripe for the picking. And so I think that happened with New Age space. Anytime there's a new space developing outside of established power systems, opportunists will come in. And so you see that shit in these places. And it's only jarring because it's new. Like, we're not as jarred with bishops. I'm picking on bishops because American Catholic bishops are worthy of picking on. But they're established. They've always been that way, so it's not as jarring when you notice it. That's the only difference, really, in terms of how power is used.
All right. Well,
way over.
Barn burner, way over. Thanks for hanging with us. And we'll see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, everybody.
Bye.